She survived imprisonment, pregnant, alone and silenced by lies. She wrote her truth in the darkness with charcoal, pain, and hope. And when the world saw the images, no one could look away. If this story has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. Marina no longer knew how many days she had been there. Time had dissolved in the absolute darkness of that abandoned barn, where the smell of decades of animal rearing still permeated every rotten wooden plank. She tried to count the days by the light filtering through a crack in the wall, but even that had become confusing. Was it morning, was it afternoon, or had a whole week passed since he last appeared? The barn was located at the back of a rural farm property on the outskirts of Rosewood, in the heart of the English countryside, a region known for its sugarcane and coffee farms, where urban progress coexisted with remnants of an agrarian past that still pulsed in old estates. That specific barn had been used for decades to raise pigs. The concrete floor still bore dark stains, hardened feces. That seemed to be part of the structure. Rotten straw in the corners, rust on hooks hanging from the beams. Even empty of animals for years, the place held a visceral memory of everything that had happened there. Pain, slaughter, abandonment, and now, her. Marina sat on the cold floor, leaning against a wall that smelled of mold and animal urine. Her hands instinctively caressed her rounded 7-month belly. Inside her, a baby girl stirred, weak, but still alive. That life depended on her, and Marina knew she had to resist even if it was just for one more day. 1 more hour, 1 more minute. She wore the same light blue maternity dress she had on the day everything changed. The fabric, once light and beautiful, was now dirty with soil, stained with sweat and tears. Her brown hair was tangled, matted to her face. Her nails were broken from scratching the walls in silent despair, but her eyes still shone. It wasn't a shine of naive hope. It was something deeper. It was rage. It was determination. It was the refusal to be erased. Outside, the muffled sound of birds singing at dawn came as a cruel reminder that the world went on, that people lived their normal lives while she was there, forgotten, locked away like a dirty secret. 6 months ago, everything was different. Marina was 32 years old and worked as a literature teacher at a private school in Rosewood. She was a simple, dreamy woman who loved her students and believed in the transformative power of words. She lived alone in a small apartment in the city center, but was surrounded by books, plants, and plans for the future. She was happy as much as possible, or at least she was at peace with herself. It was at a mutual friend's wedding party that she met Ferdinand. He was different from any man she had ever known. Tall, elegant, with that confident air of someone who knew exactly what he wanted from life. A successful businessman, owner of a chain of luxury car dealerships, Ferdinand was 45 and had a presence that dominated any room. When he invited her to dance, Marina felt like she was in a fairy tale. He was attentive from the start. He sent flowers to her work, called every day, took her to dinners at sophisticated restaurants, introduced her to his friends as if she were a trophy he had won. And Marina, who had never experienced such an intense romance, let herself be swept away. Gradually, she gave up small things. She stopped going out as much with her friends. She started dressing the way he liked, changed her haircut, agreed to live with him in the large house located in a gated community in the southern suburbs of Rosewood. At first, everything seemed perfect. Ferdinand was generous. He bought expensive clothes for her, paid for beauty treatments, said she deserved the best. But little by little, Marina began to notice something strange. He controlled her phone, asked who she was talking to, got irritated when she mentioned going back to work, said a woman like her didn't need to wear herself out teaching ill-mannered teenagers, that her role was to be by his side, beautiful, elegant, ready to accompany him to events. Marina tried to talk a few times, but Ferdinand always turned the situation around. He said she was being ungrateful, that he had pulled her out of a mediocre life, and now she was complaining, that other women would do anything to be in her place. And Marina, embarrassed, ended up apologizing. She thought maybe he was right. that she was being too demanding. 3 months after they started living together, Marina discovered she was pregnant. She took the test alone in a shopping mall bathroom, afraid of his reaction. When she saw the 2 lines confirming it, she felt a mixture of joy and terror. Part of her dreamed of being a mother. She always wanted children. But another part feared it would change everything, that Ferdinand wouldn't want it, that he would blame her. But when she told him, his reaction was surprising. Ferdinand was radiant. He opened champagne, hugged her tightly, said that this was exactly what he had always wanted, an heir, someone to continue his legacy. He immediately began planning the boy's future. He said he would be strong, intelligent, a leader, that one day he would command the family business. Marina was relieved, but at the same time uneasy. He always spoke in the masculine, always said, boy. He never considered it might be a girl. She tried to comment, but he laughed, confident. He said he knew it would be a boy, that he was sure. When the day of the ultrasound that would reveal the baby's sex arrived, Ferdinand was anxious. He made sure to be there, a rare occurrence, as he was always busy with meetings and business trips. They entered the doctor's office together, hand in hand, and Marina felt a tightening in her chest without understanding why. The doctor applied the cold gel to her belly and began to move the device carefully. The image on the screen showed the baby, small, moving slowly. Marina felt her eyes well up. It was so perfect, so fragile, so hers. The doctor smiled and said naturally that everything was fine, that the baby was healthy and developing perfectly. And then, almost as if it were an unimportant detail, she added that it was a girl. Marina saw Ferdinand's face change. It was subtle, but she noticed. His smile froze. His eyes darkened. The hand holding hers became rigid, almost squeezing too hard. A girl. He let go of her hand and remained silent for the rest of the appointment. He asked no questions. He didn't want to see any more images. He just stood there still with a distant expression. Marina tried to talk in the car, but he said everything was fine, that he was just processing it. But she knew it wasn't true. In the following days, Ferdinand began to change. He became cold, distant. He stopped asking how she was feeling. He no longer touched her belly. He didn't talk about the baby. When Marina tried to bring up feminine names or nursery decorations, he would divert the conversation or simply leave the room. And then, one night, he exploded. He was having dinner alone in the living room, watching the news when Marina sat next to him and said they needed to talk, that he was different, that she was worried, that this baby was theirs, and they needed to be in it together. Ferdinand turned his face to her, slowly, and Marina had never seen that expression before. It was hatred, pure and simple. He said he had been deceived, that he expected a son, an heir, someone who could carry his name with pride. But instead, she had failed, that a daughter was useless, that it was a waste of time and money. Marina was shocked. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She tried to argue, but he cut her off. He said she didn't understand how the world worked, that men needed sons, that it had always been that way, and that now he was trapped in a situation he didn't want. It was the first time Marina felt true fear of him. In the following weeks, Ferdinand became a different person. He started coming home late. When he arrived, he smelled of women's perfume. Marina tried to ask, but he said it was clients, meetings, work-related things, but she knew it was a lie. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, Marina discovered who the other woman was. She had gone to the supermarket and, upon returning, realized she had left her wallet in the car. She rushed back and, approaching the garage, heard voices. Ferdinand was on the phone, outside the house, smoking a cigarette. He didn't see her. Marina stood still, hidden behind a pillar, and heard everything. He was talking to someone named Brenda. He said everything was fine, that soon he would get rid of the situation, that Marina was becoming a problem. But he had a plan. And then the phrase that chilled her blood. He said that Brenda was doing a great job pretending to be pregnant with a boy, that this would make everything easier. Marina didn't quite understand at the time. Pretending to be pregnant. Why? What for? But gradually, the pieces began to fit. Ferdinand wanted to get rid of her. He wanted to replace her with another woman. A woman who, in his mind, was carrying the son he always wanted. It didn't matter that it was a lie. What mattered was the image, the control, the narrative he wanted to create. Marina returned to the house in silence, trembling, trying to process everything. That night she couldn't sleep. She stayed awake thinking about what to do. Should she confront him? Should she leave? But where would she go? She no longer had a job. She no longer had her own money. He controlled everything. It was then that she realized how dependent she had become, how much she had given up of herself. 2 days later, everything collapsed. Marina woke up in the morning and realized Ferdinand wasn't home. She found it strange, but thought he had left early for a meeting. She went to the kitchen to make coffee and saw a note on the table. It just said, "Stay quiet and no one gets hurt." Before she could process what that meant, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Ferdinand accompanied by 2 men she had never seen before. Large, serious types with faces that didn't ask questions. Ferdinand spoke with frightening calm. He said she needed rest, that she was emotionally unstable, that the stress of pregnancy was affecting her mind, that he would take care of everything, that she just needed to trust him. Marina tried to scream, but one of the men clamped his hand over her mouth forcefully. She struggled, but she was pregnant, weak, without strength. Ferdinand took her phone from her purse, turned it off and put it in his pocket. He said she wouldn't need it anymore. They dragged her out of the house, through the back, where no one could see. They crossed the property to the back, where the old unused barn stood. The door was locked with a rusty padlock. Ferdinand opened it and pushed her inside. The smell was the first thing that hit Marina, a stench of abandonment, accumulated dirt, something dead that had never been cleaned. She stumbled and fell, to her knees on the cold concrete floor, feeling the pain shoot up her legs. Ferdinand stood at the door, looking at her as if she was something he needed to discard. And then he said the phrase Marina would never forget. "You are no longer of any value to me, but this baby will be born because I need it to be born. After that, we'll sort out the rest." Before she could respond, he closed the door. The sound of the key turning in the lock echoed like a final sentence. Marina was left in the dark, alone, trying to understand what had happened. She screamed. She pounded on the door with her fists until they hurt. She cried until she had no more tears, but no one came. Hours later, perhaps days, she no longer knew, the door opened again. Ferdinand entered carrying an old metal bucket, the kind used to feed animals. Inside were food scraps, things that looked like old leftovers, stale bread, bruised fruits. He threw the bucket on the floor, near her, without saying a word, and left. Marina looked at it and felt a wave of nausea, but the hunger was greater. The baby inside her needed food, so with trembling hands, she picked up a piece of bread and ate it, swallowing her tears along with it. That's how it began. Days turned into weeks. Ferdinand appeared from time to time, always alone, always in silence. He brought food in the bucket. He brought water in dirty bottles. He never spoke to her. He just looked, checked if she was still alive, and left. Marina tried to count the days by scratching the wall with a piece of charcoal she found in a corner. But at some point she lost count, or maybe she no longer wanted to know. The barn was freezing at night and suffocating during the day. There was no bathroom. She had to relieve herself in a corner, away from where she slept, and the smell only worsened. There was no mattress, just the hard, cold floor. She used pieces of old cardboard she found stacked in a corner to try to protect herself from the cold. But the worst wasn't the physical, it was the psychological. To know that a few meters away, inside the house, Ferdinand was living his normal life, that he continued to go to work, receive friends, smile at people, that no one knew she was there, that to the outside world she had simply disappeared. And even worse, to know that his mistress was pretending to be pregnant, that Brenda was occupying her place, living the life that should have been hers, receiving the attention, the affection, the plans for the future, while Marina rotted in that filthy hole, On an especially difficult afternoon, when the hunger was unbearable and the baby inside her moved too weakly, Marina had a revelation. She couldn't give up. If she gave up, Ferdinand would win. He would succeed in erasing her existence, and her daughter would never know the truth. She would never know she had a mother who fought until the end. It was then that Marina began to act. She realized that Ferdinand was too arrogant, too confident. He thought she was broken, that she had given up. But he was wrong. Marina began to pay attention to everything, to every detail, every word he said, every move he made. She knew she would need proof, something concrete, something that would show the world what he was doing. In one corner of the barn, there was an old rusty, half-fallen metal drawer. Marina opened it carefully and found old things, nails, pieces of rope, broken tools. And then, at the bottom, something that made her stop breathing. A small memory card, like those used in old cameras. It was dirty, but it seemed intact. Marina cleaned it carefully and hid it under a loose floorboard near where she slept. She didn't yet know exactly what she would use it for, but she knew it was important. It was a tool, a possibility. And then she started writing with the charcoal she used. To mark the days, Marina began to record everything on the walls. Approximate dates, phrases Ferdinand had said, insults, threats, every word she could remember, every moment of humiliation. She wrote small, hidden in the corners, so he wouldn't see it right away. But it was all there. Her story, her truth. And when Ferdinand appeared to bring food, she remained quiet, docile, as if she were truly broken. But inside, she was mentally noting every detail, every second. One day, he brought someone with him. Marina recognized the female voice before seeing the face. It was Brenda. The mistress entered the barn with an expression of disgust, covering her nose with a perfumed handkerchief. She looked at Marina with disdain, as if looking at a wounded animal. Brenda was beautiful, Marina had to admit. Blonde, tall, with that air of someone who had never experienced hardship in life. And she was wearing an expensive maternity dress, her belly artificially rounded, faking a pregnancy that didn't exist. She approached Marina, took out her phone and began taking pictures. Marina was dirty, with disheveled hair, a pale face. Brenda smiled and said in a voice both sweet and cruel that those photos would be useful, that they would show how unstable Marina was, how she had snapped, how she needed hospitalization. Ferdinand stood beside her, watching everything without saying a word. Brenda then took a bottle of wine from her purse, opened it, and took a sip, looking directly at Marina. She said she was celebrating, that soon everything would be resolved, that Marina would just be a bad memory, a problem that was taken care of. And then they left, laughing softly, leaving Marina alone again. But that visit changed something within Marina. She realized they were planning something worse. It wasn't just keeping her there until the baby was born. It was building a narrative, a story in which she was the crazy one, the unstable one, the one who needed to be put away, and that enraged her. That night, Marina tore another piece of cardboard from the wall and wrote forcefully, "They are lying. Everything is a lie. And when I get out of here, I'm going to tell the truth." Outside, life went on. 2 floors above, in the main house, the sound of laughter and conversations echoed, muffled by distance and wind. Marina could sometimes hear it when the night was silent. The clinking of glasses, music, a party. Ferdinand was living his perfect life, and she was there, buried alive in a dirty barn, trying to survive one day at a time. But Marina knew one thing they didn't know. She had a brother, Raphael, and he would never, ever let her disappear without a fight. Raphael had always been overprotective. Since they were children, he looked after her. And even after she started dating Ferdinand, even with the distance that grew between them, Raphael never stopped calling. He never stopped sending messages. Every week, without fail, he asked how she was, and now she knew he must be wondering why she wasn't responding anymore. Ferdinand had told everyone that Marina needed rest, that she was emotionally distraught with the pregnancy, that she didn't want visitors, that he was taking care of everything and people believed him. Because Ferdinand was respected, because he knew how to convince. But Raphael was different. He knew his sister. He knew when something was wrong. And Marina was sure he wouldn't give up easily. She just needed to hold on just a little longer. Until he found out. Meanwhile, Marina continued writing on the walls. She continued to store every mental piece of evidence she could. She continued to feed the baby inside her, even when the food was disgusting, even when the water was dirty. Because she wasn't going to give up. Not now, not ever. Marina gently touched her belly, feeling her daughter stir weakly, and she whispered softly, like a promise. "I'm going to get us out of here, I promise. You will be born free, and he will pay for everything." Outside, the sun was rising again, another day, another chance, another silent struggle against oblivion. And Marina, even trapped in that hell, chose not to be erased. Rafael Santos sat on the balcony of his apartment in Rosewood, staring intently at the phone in his hand. The screen showed the last message he had sent Marina, exactly 14 days ago. It was marked as delivered but unread. 14 days without a response. 14 days of absolute silence. This wasn't normal. Marina always responded. Always. Even when she was busy, she always sent a quick emoji, a short audio, anything to show she was alive and thinking of him. But this time, nothing. Just silence. Raphael was a firefighter, accustomed to trusting his instincts, and all his instincts were screaming that something was profoundly wrong. He had tried calling several times. Her phone went straight to voicemail. He sent messages via WhatsApp, Instagram, even email, nothing. Then he tried calling Ferdinand. He at least answered, but the conversation was always the same. Ferdinand spoke in that calm, controlled voice, explaining that Marina was fine, just tired, that the pregnancy was difficult for her, that the doctor had recommended absolute rest, that she was emotionally sensitive and had asked not to receive visitors. That he, Ferdinand, was taking care of everything. The first time, Raphael believed him. The second, he was hesitant. The third, he began to seriously suspect. Marina would never ask to stop talking to him. Never. They had been very close since childhood. When their parents died in a car accident 10 years ago, they only had each other. Raphael was 3 years older and always felt responsible for protecting his sister, and Marina, in turn, always told him everything. Everything. Until she met Ferdinand. After she started dating that man, things changed. At first it was subtle. Marina came. Less often to Sunday lunches. She took longer to respond to messages. When they saw each other, she seemed different. More reserved, more careful with her words, as if she was always measuring what she could or couldn't say. Raphael didn't like Ferdinand, never did. There was something about that man that bothered him. His arrogant way of speaking, the way he treated Marina as if she were property, the veiled remarks about Raphael just being a firefighter, while he, Ferdinand, was a successful businessman. But Marina seemed happy, so Raphael tried to swallow his reservations. He tried to be polite. He tried to give the relationship a chance. After all, his sister was an adult and had the right to make her own choices. But now, looking at that 2-week silence, Raphael could no longer ignore what he felt. Something was very wrong, and he needed to find out what. While Raphael brooded over his worries, a few miles away, inside Ferdinand's luxurious house, life went on with disturbing normalcy. Ferdinand was in the living room, wearing a silk robe, drinking espresso while reading financial news on his tablet. Beside him, Brenda was lying on the sofa, her fake belly perfectly positioned under a light pink maternity dress. She was eating chocolate-covered strawberries and laughing at something on her phone. The scene was one of absurd domestic peace, as if nothing was wrong, as if there wasn't a pregnant woman locked in a barn just a few meters away. Brenda was 28 and worked as a marketing manager at one of Ferdinand's dealerships. That's how they met. She was ambitious, beautiful, and knew exactly how to manipulate powerful men. When she realized Ferdinand was frustrated with his wife's pregnancy, she saw an opportunity. It was she who suggested the plan. It was she who said she could pretend to be pregnant with a boy, that she could use a fake belly and convince everyone. And when Marina's baby was born, they could simply get rid of her and keep the child. Or better yet, get rid of both and start over. Ferdinand had liked the idea, not because he loved Brenda, but because he saw her as a useful tool, a partner who understood what he wanted, not like Marina, who always questioned, who always wanted to talk about feelings, who always made him feel guilty. Brenda was different. She didn't question. She just executed. And she was doing an excellent job. She had told everyone she was pregnant. She posted photos on social media showing her growing belly. She went to fake doctor's appointments. She bought baby clothes. She set up a boys' nursery in the house. Everything perfectly calculated, and no one suspected. Why would they suspect? Ferdinand was a respected man, rich, influential. If he said his wife was ill and needed rest, and that his new partner was pregnant, who was the public to doubt? That morning, Ferdinand looked at Brenda and said they needed to be more careful, that Marina's brother was asking too many questions, that they needed to reinforce the story. Brenda merely shrugged and said he was being paranoid, that no one would believe a firefighter trying to cause trouble, that his word, Ferdinand's, was worth much more. But Ferdinand wasn't so sure. He knew men like Raphael, stubborn, protective, dangerous when they believed someone they loved was at risk. So he decided to take a preventive measure. He picked up his phone and called a lawyer friend. He said he needed documents, fake medical reports showing that Marina was suffering from severe depression, that she was having breakdowns, that she was a danger to herself and the baby, and that therefore he, as a concerned husband, had been forced to temporarily confine her at home under medical supervision. The lawyer didn't bat an eye. He just asked how much he was willing to pay. Ferdinand gave a number, and the papers began to be prepared. Meanwhile, in the barn, Marina was enduring her own private hell. It had been another long day, or maybe another night. She no longer knew the difference. Time had become an amorphous mass without beginning or end. There was only constant hunger, penetrating cold, and back pain from sleeping on the hard floor. The baby inside her continued to move, but more weakly each time. Marina knew she needed proper nutrition, vitamins, medical care, but she had none of that. She only had the food scraps Ferdinand threw into the metal bucket as if she were an animal. That morning, or afternoon or night, the barn door opened again. Marina instinctively cowered against the wall, prepared for more humiliation. But this time it wasn't just Ferdinand. Brenda was with him again. And this time she carried a professional video camera. Ferdinand stood still as Brenda entered with the camera in her hand, focusing on Marina with an expression of false concern on her face. Brenda began to speak, as if narrating a documentary. She said she was there to record Marina's condition, that it was sad to see a woman in that state, that the pregnancy had profoundly affected her mental health, that she refused to leave that place, that she had violent outbursts whenever they tried to help her. Marina looked at the camera, at Brenda, and then at Ferdinand, and suddenly something inside her broke, not from despair, but from pure rage. She stood up, even with trembling legs, and walked until she was very close to the camera. She looked directly into the lens and said, in a hoarse but firm voice, "My name is Marina Santos. I am 7 months pregnant. I have been locked here against my will for weeks. This woman is lying. Everything she is saying is a lie. I am not crazy. I was kidnapped by my own husband." Brenda stopped recording immediately with a look of shock. Ferdinand lunged forward and slapped Marina across the face, with such force that she fell to the floor. He knelt down, grabbed her by the hair and whispered close to her ear, "If you do that again, I guarantee you will never see the light of day again. Understood? Never again." Then he took the camera from Brenda's hands, deleted the video in front of Marina and left, slamming the door shut. Marina lay there, on the floor, her face throbbing with pain, but smiling. Because she had done something they didn't expect. She had reacted. She had shown that she was still alive, that she was still fighting, and more importantly, she had noticed something in Brenda's eyes. Fear. Brenda had felt fear when Marina spoke, because that wasn't part of the plan. That showed Marina still had strength, and that was dangerous. That night, Marina wrote more things on the walls. This time she included full names: Ferdinand Maxwell and Brenda Carter, approximate date, and the phrase, "They are recording lies to incriminate me." It was all she could do: record, keep, wait. Outside, Raphael grew increasingly restless. He had gone to Ferdinand's house twice but hadn't been able to get in. The first time, Ferdinand said Marina was sleeping. The second, that she had gone to a medical appointment. But Raphael didn't believe him. Something about all of it felt wrong. So he decided to do something he knew was risky, but necessary. He started investigating on his own. First, he went to the school where Marina worked. He spoke with the headmistress, who confirmed that Marina had requested early maternity leave a few weeks ago on medical advice. But the headmistress also said something strange. Marina had requested the leave in person, but she seemed nervous, as if someone was pressuring her. Next, Raphael went to Marina's obstetrician's office. He couldn't speak to the doctor directly, but talked to the secretary, and he discovered something shocking. Marina's last 3 appointments had been cancelled by Ferdinand, who said she was feeling unwell and couldn't attend. This was strange. Very strange. A woman 7 months pregnant should be having regular appointments, not cancelling all of them. Raphael returned home, his head buzzing. He knew he needed more information. He needed proof, but he didn't know where to start. It was then that he decided to use his contacts in the fire department. He knew people in the police, people who could make some discreet inquiries. Not officially, not yet, but enough to find out if anything suspicious was happening. A friend of his, a detective, agreed to make some informal checks, and what he discovered was disturbing. Ferdinand had a history. Nothing criminal officially, but there were 2 old archived complaints. One from a former girlfriend who had disappeared for a few weeks and then reappeared saying she had had a nervous breakdown. Another from an employee who accused him of harassment and manipulation, but who mysteriously withdrew the complaint after he offered a financial settlement. The pattern was there. Ferdinand was a man who used money and power to control women, and now Marina was in his hands. Raphael felt his blood boil. He needed to act. But he knew he couldn't simply break into Ferdinand's house without proof. That would be illegal and could worsen Marina's situation. He needed to be smart. He needed a plan. So he decided to conduct surveillance. He began to observe Ferdinand's house from a distance, noting times, movements, patterns. He saw Ferdinand leave for work every morning. He saw Brenda also leave frequently. He saw that at night. They hosted friends for dinners and parties. Everything seemed normal, but Raphael knew it wasn't. One night, while observing the house from a hidden spot on the street, Raphael saw something that caught his attention. Ferdinand went out alone through the back of the house carrying something. It looked like a bucket. He walked to an old building at the back of the property, opened a door with a key, and went inside. Raphael waited. 15 minutes later, Ferdinand came out empty-handed and went back into the house. What was that building? Why did Ferdinand go there alone at night? Hidden? Raphael decided he needed to find out. But not that night. Not yet. First, he needed to make sure he was alone, that there were no guards or cameras, that he could get in and out unseen. In the following days, he continued to observe, and he noticed a pattern. Ferdinand went to that building every night around 10 o'clock, always alone, always with the bucket, and he always stayed only a few minutes. It was strange, very strange. Raphael began to suspect what it might be, and the idea that formed in his head was so horrible he almost didn't want to believe it. But it made sense. All the sense in the world. Marina was there, in that building. Ferdinand had locked her in there. Raphael felt a wave of nausea and anger at the same time. If he was right, his sister was being held prisoner just a few meters from where he stood, and he couldn't just break down the door and get her out, because that could put her life at risk. Ferdinand could react violently. He could hurt her before Raphael could help. He needed to be careful, very careful. While Raphael planned his next move inside the barn, Marina was going through another ordeal. Brenda had returned alone this time, and she was in a bad mood. Something had happened, perhaps an argument with Ferdinand, perhaps just the stress of maintaining the lie. She entered the barn with a half-empty bottle of wine and looked at Marina with contempt. She said she was tired of it all, that Marina was disrupting their plans, that if it were up to her, everything would have been resolved more definitively by now. Marina just looked at her in silence. She no longer had the energy to argue. She no longer had the energy to feel fear. She just wanted it to end. Brenda approached, took another sip of wine, and then did something unexpected. She started talking, confessing, as if she needed to vent to someone, even if it was to her own victim. She said that at first she had found everything exciting, the idea of deceiving everyone, of having a rich and powerful man by her side, of living a life of luxury. But now she was tired. Ferdinand was cold, controlling. He treated her as he treated everything, as a tool. And Brenda was beginning to realize that when he no longer needed her, he would probably get rid of her too. Marina listened in silence, and then, for the first time in weeks, she spoke to Brenda for real. She said there was still time for her to get out of it, that she could tell the truth, that she could help Marina get out of there and, in return, perhaps get a deal with justice. Brenda laughed, a bitter, joyless laugh. She said it was too late, that she was too deeply involved, that if she told the truth, she would be arrested too, so it was no use. And then she did something Marina didn't expect. She took out her phone, recorded an audio, and showed it to Marina. It was her voice, Brenda's, simulating crying and saying she was afraid of Marina, that Marina had threatened her, that Marina was dangerous. Brenda smiled and said that this was just another layer of protection, another false proof, another lie to cover the truth. Marina felt despair tighten her chest. They had thought of everything, every detail, every possibility. How was she going to prove what was happening if they had so many lies constructed? But then she remembered the memory card hidden under the floorboard. She remembered the writings on the walls. She remembered that if she managed to get out of there alive, she would at least have something to show. She just needed to survive, just a little longer. Brenda stumbled out of the barn, clearly intoxicated, and Marina was alone again, in the dark, hearing the muffled sound of laughter coming from the house. Upstairs, Ferdinand was hosting friends for dinner. Businessmen, partners, influential people, all toasting to the future baby, to the heir who was on the way. And no one knew that the pregnant woman was locked up a few meters away, dying of hunger and despair. The hypocrisy was so great it was surreal. But Marina knew it couldn't last forever. At some point, the truth would come out. At some point, someone would notice. And she was betting all her chips on Raphael. He was stubborn, protective. He wouldn't give up on her. Never had. And he wasn't going to start now. So Marina continued to do what she could, noting, recording, storing every piece of evidence she could. And when the pain became too unbearable, when hunger made her stomach churn, when the cold cut to her bones, she closed her eyes and thought of her daughter, the girl who didn't yet have a name, the girl who would be born free, the girl who would grow up knowing that her mother fought until her last breath to protect her. And that was enough to keep her going. One more night, one more day, one more hour, one more minute. She would endure, because she had no choice, because giving up meant letting Ferdinand win. And that Marina could not allow. While the world outside kept turning, indifferent to her suffering, Marina Santos, a literature teacher, a 7-month pregnant woman, locked in a filthy barn like an animal, did the only thing she could still do: resist, and hope her brother would arrive in time. Raphael couldn't sleep that night. He sat in the living room watching the clock on the wall, waiting for the right moment. It had to be when Ferdinand wasn't home, when there was less risk, when he could enter that building and check if his suspicion was correct. At 6 in the morning he was back at his observation point near the house. He saw Ferdinand leave for work at 7:30, as always. He saw Brenda leave half an hour later, probably for some fake appointment. The house was empty. It was his chance. Raphael waited another 15 minutes to make sure no one would return. Then, dressed in dark clothes and carrying only a flashlight and his phone, he jumped over the back wall of the property. His heart pounded so hard, it felt like it would explode from his chest. He crossed the grounds quickly, always alert to any movement. When he got close to the old building, he realized it was an old barn. The wooden walls were rotten, the roof had holes, and the door was locked with chains and a large padlock. Raphael pressed his ear against the door and listened. At first, nothing. Just silence. But then, a faint sound, almost imperceptible. A breath. A low moan of pain. His blood ran cold. Someone was inside. And from the sound, they were in bad shape. Very bad. Raphael didn't think twice. He grabbed an iron bar he saw leaning against the wall and began to force the padlock. It made noise. A lot of noise, but it didn't matter. If Marina was inside, he needed to get her out now. The padlock gave way with a snap. Raphael tore off the chains and forced the door open. The smell that came from inside hit him like a punch. It was a stench of waste, mold, decay. He covered his nose with his arm and turned on his phone's flashlight. And then he saw her. Marina was lying on the floor, curled up in a fetal position. The light blue maternity dress she wore was dirty with soil, stained, torn in places. Her hair was matted to her pale, sweat-covered face. Her hands trembled, and her belly, enormous, contracted in visible spasms. Raphael felt his legs weaken. He ran to her and knelt beside her, cupping his sister's face in his hands. "Marina, it's me, Rafa, are you hearing me?" She opened her eyes slowly with difficulty. It took a few seconds for her to focus on him, and when she finally recognized her brother, her eyes filled with tears. "Raphael," she whispered, her voice hoarse and weak, "you came. I knew you would come. I'm here. Sis, I'm going to get you out of here. Everything will be okay now." But when he tried to lift her, Marina moaned in pain and clutched her belly. "No," she said, "I can't. It's starting. The baby. It's coming." Raphael felt panic take over him. No, it couldn't be now. Not here. Not in this horrible place. But Marina was having contractions. Strong. Regular. Labor had begun. Raphael looked around, desperate. There was nothing there. No supplies. No help. Just dirt, old straw and abandonment. But he couldn't take her to the hospital now. There wasn't time. The baby was coming too fast. He took off his jacket and placed it under her head. He grabbed his phone and called a doctor friend, quickly explaining the situation. The friend, shocked, began to give instructions over the phone. Raphael put it on speakerphone and followed every word. Marina was sweating, crying, squeezing her brother's hand so hard that his nails left marks. The contractions were getting closer, more intense. Raphael looked into her eyes and said, "You are strong, Marina. Always have been. You can do this. I'm here with you. I won't leave you alone." And Marina, even in pain, even in the despair of that moment, found strength because she had to find it. For herself, for her daughter, for everything she had been through. The birth lasted almost 2 hours, 2 hours of unbearable pain, muffled screams, mixed fear and courage. Raphael did everything he could. He followed the doctor's instructions over the phone. He encouraged his sister. He wiped the sweat from her face. He held her hand when she thought she couldn't take it anymore. And then, amidst that dirt in that barn that smelled of death and abandonment, a new life came into the world. The baby's cry echoed through the rotten wooden walls. A strong, healthy cry full of life. Raphael held the girl with trembling hands, cleaned her with the shirt he had taken off, and placed her in her mother's arms. Marina looked at her daughter for the first time and burst into tears. They were not tears of sadness. They were of relief, of victory, of pure and absolute love. "She's alive," Marina whispered. "Our daughter is alive." Raphael was also crying. He took out his phone and started recording. He recorded Marina holding the baby. He recorded the surroundings, the dirty floor, the walls with charcoal writings, the food bucket in the corner, everything, every detail, because that was proof. It was the physical and undeniable truth of what had happened there. Then, with extreme care, he took the jacket he still had in his backpack and wrapped the baby. He helped Marina get up slowly, supporting her entire weight, and the three of them walked out of that barn into the daylight. The sunlight burned Marina's eyes. She had spent so much time in the dark that the brightness hurt, but it was a good pain. It was the pain of freedom. Raphael took his sister and niece directly to the car parked outside. He carefully placed them in the back seat and drove at high speed. But not to the hospital. Not yet. First, he needed to ensure they would be safe, that Ferdinand couldn't reach them. He took the two to an isolated cabin in the rural area, almost 100 miles from Rosewood. It belonged to a former military friend who had agreed to help without asking questions. There, a family friend nurse was waiting to care for Marina and the baby. When they arrived, Marina was weak but conscious. The nurse examined her and the baby and said both needed urgent care, but they would survive. They were dehydrated, malnourished, but alive. Raphael stayed with them just long enough to ensure they were stable. Then he gathered all the evidence he had, the photos of the barn, the videos, the recordings, and went directly to the federal police headquarters in Rosewood. He entered the police station with a bag full of evidence and asked to speak with the detective responsible for serious crimes. When he was attended to, he dumped everything on the table. Photos, videos, audio recordings, and told the whole story from beginning to end. The detective, a middle-aged man named Detective Henry Cooper, remained silent as he watched the videos. He saw Marina dirty, holding the newborn baby on the floor of a filthy barn. He saw the writings on the walls. He saw the deplorable state of the place. When he finished, he looked at Raphael and said a single word: monstrous. Immediately, an investigation was opened. The federal police do not mess around when it comes to crimes like aggravated false imprisonment, psychological torture, bodily harm, and human rights violations. A team was assembled, warrants were issued, and in less than 2 hours police officers were on their way to Ferdinand's house. But when they arrived, they found the house empty. Ferdinand and Brenda had fled. The federal police quickly placed the two on the wanted list. They blocked bank accounts, alerted borders, began tracking credit card movements and cell phones, and they discovered something interesting. Brenda's cell phone had made a call to a hotel in the Farnham region, a town near the border with the Midlands, about 2 hours from Rosewood. It was a lead, an operation, was organized. Federal police officers were sent to the region, and in less than 24 hours, they found Ferdinand's car parked on an abandoned rural property near Farnham. The house was empty, but there were signs that someone had been there recently. Clothes, food, documents. And then one of the officers found something important, a USB drive hidden inside a drawer. When they connected it to the computer, they found videos, many videos. These were the recordings Brenda had made of Marina in the barn, the videos they planned to use to incriminate her, to build the narrative that she was crazy, unstable, dangerous. But what they didn't know was that some of these recordings had captured audio, conversations between Ferdinand and Brenda, accidental confessions, discussions about what to do with Marina after the baby was born, plans to forge documents, to bribe doctors, to construct a false story. Everything was there, every word, every piece of evidence. The federal police intensified the search. They used tracking dogs, drones, helicopters, and finally, at dusk on the second day of the search, they found the two trying to cross a trail that led into the Midlands. Ferdinand tried to run, went into the bushes, tried to hide, but the dogs found him quickly. When the police reached him, he was covered in mud, scratched, breathing with difficulty. The image was almost poetic justice. The man who had locked his wife in a dirty barn was now himself dirty, desperate, captured. Brenda did not try to flee. When the police surrounded her, she just sat on the ground and started to cry. She said it wasn't her fault, that Ferdinand had forced her, that she didn't want to do it. But no one believed her. Both were handcuffed and taken back to Rosewood. During the journey, they said nothing. They remained silent, looking out the car window, probably processing the fact that their lives were over. At the federal police headquarters, they were interrogated separately. Ferdinand, arrogant to the end, refused to speak without a lawyer. But Brenda, scared and realizing she was in serious trouble, began to talk. She confessed everything. That she had never been pregnant, that she used a fake belly, that it was her idea to help Ferdinand get rid of Marina, that they had planned every detail, that they falsified documents, that they bribed people, that they built lies. The interrogator asked why she had done all that, and Brenda, crying, said she wanted money, status, a life of luxury, and that she thought Ferdinand would marry her, that he would give her everything he promised. But when the interrogator showed the videos found on the USB drive, including one where Ferdinand clearly told a lawyer that Brenda was just a temporary tool and would be discarded when no longer useful, she realized she had been used. That Ferdinand had never loved her, never intended to stay with her. She had been as much a victim of his manipulation as Marina, in a different way, and now she would pay the price along with him. Ferdinand's lawyers tried to argue. They said Marina had consented to stay in the barn, that she was having a breakdown, that it was all a misunderstanding. But the evidence was irrefutable. There were Raphael's videos showing the state of the barn. There were the audio recordings found on the USB drive. There was Brenda's testimony. There were the writings on the walls. There was the memory card that Marina had hidden, which Raphael found and delivered to the police. And there was the most powerful image of all, Marina holding her newborn baby in her arms on the floor of a filthy barn, with her dress dirty and her face pale, but her eyes shining with determination. That image spread through the media. Newspapers picked up the story. Television news channels broadcast it non-stop. Social media exploded. All of England was talking about Marina Santos, the woman who was locked in a barn by her own husband because the baby she carried was a girl. Public outrage was immediate and massive. Protests were organized. Women took to the streets demanding justice. Human rights NGOs mobilized. The pressure on the judicial system was enormous, and the Public Prosecution Service acted quickly. They indicted Ferdinand for aggravated false imprisonment, psychological torture, bodily harm, attempted document fraud, and human rights violations. Brenda was indicted as an accomplice in all these crimes, in addition to false representation for faking pregnancy. Both were held in pre-trial detention, without bail, considered a risk to society and the victim. Marina, still recovering in the cabin with her daughter, received the news from her brother, and for the first time in months she felt something akin to peace. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the feeling that justice was being served, that she had not been forgotten, that her voice had been heard. Raphael stayed with her throughout the initial recovery. He cared for his niece as if she were his own daughter. He changed diapers, prepared bottles, stayed awake on nights when Marina had nightmares and woke up screaming, reliving her days in the barn. But gradually, Marina began to return to life. Slowly, she began to smile again, to hold her daughter with more confidence, to plan a future. She decided to name the girl Sophia, because Sophia means wisdom, and that child had been born of pain but would bring wisdom, would bring healing, would bring a new beginning. 2 weeks after the rescue, Marina finally felt strong enough to give her official testimony to the federal police. She went to the headquarters, accompanied by Raphael and a lawyer specializing in crimes against women who had offered to represent her pro bono. Marina told everything, every detail, every humiliation, every moment of fear, every second of despair. The investigators listened in silence, noting every word. Some had tears in their eyes. When she finished, Detective Henry said he had rarely seen such a cruel case, but that he had also rarely seen such a strong victim, that Marina had done something extraordinary by collecting evidence, by recording everything, by not giving up. Marina merely nodded. She didn't feel strong, she felt tired, hurt, but alive. And that was something. The trial date was set, and all of England eagerly awaited to see what the fate of Ferdinand Maxwell and Brenda Carter would be. Marina knew she would have to return to that place mentally, that she would have to relive everything again in court, that she would have to look into the eyes of the man who locked her up like an animal. But she was ready, because she was no longer the same woman who had been imprisoned in that barn. She had walked through hell and had survived, and now she would ensure he paid for every second of suffering he had caused. Raphael promised he would be by her side, always. And Sophia, sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, was living proof that love wins, that life finds a way, that even in the darkest place there is still light. The trial was approaching, and with it the final moment, the moment when the truth would be told before everyone, when the guilty would answer, when justice, finally, would be done. The Rosewood Federal Justice Courthouse had never seen so many people. From the early hours of the morning, hundreds of people gathered outside waiting for a chance to enter the trial that had become the most talked about in the country. Journalists from all over England were there, television cameras, photographers, and especially women. Hundreds of women holding signs with messages of support for Marina. Justice for Marina. We are not alone. Her voice is our voice. Inside the building on the second floor, Marina was in a private room with Raphael and her lawyer, Dr. Felicity Lawson. She wore a simple yet elegant blue outfit, and more importantly, she wore the same light blue maternity dress she had on the day she was rescued. It had been washed, restored, but still bore the marks of what had happened. Small stains that didn't come out. A mended tear. It was a deliberate choice, a silent message. Raphael held Sophia in his arms. The girl was 3 months old now, and was healthy, growing strong. Her brown eyes sparkled with curiosity as she looked around. She didn't know about the battle being fought for her, but one day she would, and she would know that her mother had fought until the end. Marina looked in the mirror and saw her own reflection. She had lost weight during her captivity and was still recovering. But there was something different in her eyes. It wasn't the innocence from before. It was something deeper, more solid. It was the strength of someone who had died and been reborn. Dr. Felicity placed her hand on Marina's shoulder and said in a firm voice, "Are you ready? Because now is the time. Now you will tell your story in front of everyone, and the whole world will hear." Marina took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, I am ready." At 9 o'clock in the morning, the doors to the courtroom were opened. Marina entered, accompanied by Raphael, who carried Sophia and her lawyer. The courtroom was packed, all chairs occupied, people standing in the back. And in the center, separated by security guards, were Ferdinand Maxwell and Brenda Carter. Ferdinand wore a dark suit and was visibly thinner. His time in pretrial detention had taken its toll, but he still maintained that arrogant posture, his chin raised, as if he was above it all. Brenda, beside him, seemed much smaller. She was pale, with deep dark circles under her eyes, clearly terrified. When Marina entered, everyone in the courtroom fell silent. It was as if time had stopped. She walked slowly down the central aisle, her head held high, looking straight ahead. She passed very close to Ferdinand. And for a fraction of a second their eyes met. He looked away first. And Marina knew, at that moment, that he had lost. He had lost all control, all manipulation. She was no longer the woman he could dominate. The judge, Judge Robert Maxwell, a man in his 50s with a reputation for being rigorous but fair, struck his gavel and declared the session open. He read the accusations in a clear, grave voice: aggravated false imprisonment, psychological torture, bodily harm, attempted fraud, human rights violations, crimes against human dignity. The list was long, and each word echoed through the room like a sentence. The Public Prosecution Service began presenting the evidence. They showed the videos. Raphael had recorded in the barn. The images appeared on monitors throughout the room and people began to cry. Seeing Marina in that state, dirty, holding her newborn baby on the filthy floor, was something no words could adequately describe. They showed photos of the writings on the walls, the dates, the phrases, the charcoal marks recording each day of suffering. They showed the oxidized metal bucket where Ferdinand threw food as if she were an animal. And then, the final blow, they played the audio recordings found on the USB drive. Ferdinand's voice talking to lawyers about how to forge documents. Brenda's voice laughing as she took pictures of Marina and saying it would be used against her. The discussions about what to do after the baby was born. The courtroom was in absolute silence. Only the sound of the recordings echoed through the walls, and then a sob, someone crying, and then another and another, until half the people in the room had tears in their eyes. Ferdinand continued to stare straight ahead, expressionless. But Marina saw. She saw the muscle in his jaw clench. She saw his hands clench into fists. He was losing control, and he knew it. When it was the defense's turn, Ferdinand's lawyers tried to argue. They said he was under emotional pressure, that the discovery that the baby was a girl had affected his judgment, that he had acted impulsively, without thinking of the consequences. But the judge cut them off. He said no emotional pressure justified locking a pregnant woman in a filthy barn for weeks, that it was not impulse, it was calculated cruelty, it was pure evil. Brenda's lawyers tried a different approach. They argued that she had been manipulated by Ferdinand, that she was young, inexperienced, that she had been used. But the prosecutor quickly countered. He showed the recordings where Brenda made active decisions, where she suggested things, where she laughed at Marina's situation. Manipulated or not, she had chosen to participate. She had chosen to be an accomplice. And then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Marina was called to testify. She rose slowly and walked to the front of the courtroom. She stood before the microphone, looking at the judge, at the public, at the journalists, and finally at Ferdinand and Brenda. The judge asked if she wanted to sit, but Marina shook her head. She said she preferred to stand, that she had spent too long lying on the cold floor of that barn, that now she wanted to stand, strong, alive. And then she began to speak. She told everything. From the beginning, from the day she met Ferdinand and thought she had found a fairy tale, from the first signs of control that she ignored, from the discovery of her pregnancy and the joy she felt, from the ultrasound that revealed it was a girl and the instant change in his behavior. She told about the day she was dragged to the barn, about the smell, about the cold, about the hunger, about the days that blurred together, about the food thrown into the bucket as if she were an animal, about Brenda entering to take photos and humiliate her. And then, with her voice breaking but firm, she told about the birth, about giving birth on the filthy floor alone until her brother arrived, about holding her daughter for the first time and promising that she would grow up free, that she would never know that pain, that humiliation. When she finished, the courtroom was in absolute silence. Many people were openly weeping. Even some of the security guards had tears in their eyes, and Marina, standing with tears on her face but her head held high, looked directly at Ferdinand and said, "You tried to erase me. You tried to destroy me, but I am here, and my daughter is here, and you lost." Ferdinand finally broke. He looked away. He lowered his head, and Marina knew she had won. The judge called a recess for everyone to compose themselves. When the session resumed, it was time for the defendants to speak. Brenda was first. She went to the microphone crying, asking for forgiveness. She said she regretted everything, that she had made terrible mistakes, that she was willing to cooperate fully with justice, that she wanted to make amends somehow. Marina listened in silence. She felt no anger. She felt no pity. She felt only weariness. Brenda had made her choices, and now she would pay for them. Ferdinand, on the other hand, refused to speak. He remained silent, looking straight ahead, as if all of this were just a temporary inconvenience. His lawyers tried to persuade him to say something, but he just shook his head. The judge then announced that he would need a few days to analyze all the evidence and prepare the sentence. The session was adjourned and everyone left the courtroom. But outside, Marina was greeted as a hero. Dozens of women approached her, some just to hug her, others to say that they too had gone through abusive relationships, that they saw their own stories in hers, that she had given voice to thousands of silenced women. Marina hugged everyone she could. She cried with them. She listened to their stories. And she realized that her pain was not just hers, it was collective. It was the pain of all women who had been treated as less than human. 3 days later, the sentence was published. Judge Robert Maxwell wrote 52 pages detailing each crime, each piece of evidence, each aggravating factor. And in the end, the conclusion, Ferdinand Maxwell was sentenced to 30 years of imprisonment in a maximum security prison without the right to appeal for release. All his assets were confiscated to cover Marina and Sophia's medical and psychological care, in addition to compensation for moral damages, amounting to millions. Brenda Carter was sentenced to 12 years of imprisonment in a semi-open regime, with the possibility of progression to an open regime after serving 1/3 of the sentence, provided she demonstrated good behavior. She was also ordered to pay compensation, albeit smaller, and to perform community service in shelters for women victims of violence when on parole. The sentence was considered historic. Jurists praised the rigidity and justice applied. Human rights NGOs celebrated, and Marina, reading the decision at home with Raphael by her side, finally allowed herself to feel relieved. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was justice. It was confirmation that her voice had been heard, that the system this time had worked. In the following months, Marina's life changed completely. She became a national symbol of resistance and overcoming. She received invitations to give lectures, to participate in campaigns against domestic violence, to tell her story in books and documentaries. But Marina refused most of them. She said she didn't want to be defined solely by that trauma, that she wanted to rebuild her life, to be a mother, to be a teacher again, to be Marina, simply. She moved to a new apartment, far from Ferdinand's house, far from the barn, far from everything that reminded her of those days. Raphael helped with the move and continued to be a constant presence in his niece's life. Marina returned to teaching, this time at a public school. She said she wanted to work with young people who truly needed it, that she wanted to make a difference. Her students loved her, and she found in teaching a form of healing. Sophia grew up healthy and happy. She didn't know the story that brought her into the world, but one day she would, and she would know that she was the daughter of a strong woman, of a woman who refused to be broken. The barn where Marina had been held prisoner was demolished. Raphael insisted on it. He said a place with so much pain could not still stand. And in its place, with part of the compensation money, Marina decided to build something new. A support center for women victims of domestic violence was inaugurated, a safe place where they could stay temporarily while rebuilding their lives. It had clean, comfortable rooms. It had psychologists, social workers, lawyers offering free help, and it had hope. Marina named the center Sophia's House, in honor of her daughter, and also in honor of the wisdom that comes from pain transformed into strength. On the inauguration day, hundreds of people showed up, women who had been helped by Marina, people who had followed her story, and of course, Raphael, who cut the ribbon beside his sister holding Sophia in his arms. The girl, now 1 year old, smiled at the cameras without understanding the meaning of it all. But one day, she would understand. One day, she would know that she was born in a place of pain, but that her existence had generated something greater, something that would help other women, that would save other lives. 2 years after the trial, Marina received a letter. It was from Brenda from prison, a long letter full of apologies, saying that she had spent all that time reflecting, that she had had therapy, that she understood the gravity of what she had done, that she didn't expect forgiveness, but she wanted Marina to know that she deeply regretted it. Marina read the letter in silence. Raphael, who was with her, asked what she would do, if she would respond, if she would forgive. Marina folded the letter carefully and said, "I don't know if I forgive. I don't know if I ever will. But I won't carry anger anymore. I won't let what happened control my life anymore. Brenda will have to live with her choices, and I will live with mine." And then she put the letter in a drawer and went back to living her life. Ferdinand, on the other hand, never showed remorse. He continued to serve his sentence in a maximum security prison, isolated, without visits. His old friends abandoned him. His businesses were sold. His name became synonymous with cruelty, and he who so valued power and control lost both completely. For Marina, that was enough justice. It wasn't revenge, it was consequence. And consequences, she had learned, were inevitable. 5 years after the rescue, Marina sat on a park bench in Rosewood, watching Sophia play with other children in the playground, The girl was 6 years old now and was smart, curious, full of life. She had her mother's eyes and Raphael's smile. Raphael sat beside his sister, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered one to her and they sat there in comfortable silence, watching Sophia laugh as she slid down the slide. "Are you happy?" Raphael asked suddenly. Marina thought for a moment and then nodded. "Yes, I think so, or at least I'm at peace, and that's a lot." Sophia ran to them, her hair flying in the wind, and jumped into Marina's lap. "Mommy, can I have ice cream?" Marina smiled and kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Yes, my love." And as they walked together towards the ice cream parlor, Marina looked around. She saw the busy streets of Rosewood. She saw people living their normal lives. She saw the blue sky above them, and she felt gratitude. Gratitude for being alive, for having fought, for having won. She had been through hell. She had been broken. But she had also been rebuilt. And now she was stronger than ever. Sophia, holding her mother's hand, asked, "Mummy, are you happy?" Marina squeezed her daughter's small, warm hand and answered sincerely, "I am, my love, very happy." And it was true. Despite everything, despite the trauma, despite the scars that would never completely disappear, she was happy because she had chosen to live. She had chosen not to be defined by the worst moment of her life. She had chosen to transform pain into purpose. Raphael registered Sophia's name with his own surname, Santos, not Maxwell, because that man did not deserve to have his name carried by such a pure child. Sophia Santos, daughter of Marina Santos, niece of Raphael Santos, a family built on love, not on the aggressor's blood. Marina's story became an inspiration for legislative changes. Bills were created to better protect pregnant women from domestic violence, to facilitate reporting, to punish cases of false imprisonment within relationships more severely. Marina was invited to testify in Parliament, and there, before MPs and Lords, she told her story once again, not out of pain, but so that other women would not have to go through the same. And when asked what she would say to women who are in abusive relationships at that moment, Marina took a deep breath and said, "I would say that you are not alone, that it is not your fault, that you deserve more, and that it is possible to get out. It's difficult, it's scary, but it is possible. And on the other side, there is life. There is hope. There is a new beginning." Her words echoed through the chamber, and at that moment, Marina Santos, the literature teacher who had been locked in a barn like an animal, became a voice for thousands of silenced women. Her story did not end in the barn. It did not end in the trial. It ended there, on that park bench watching her daughter play. It ended in Sophia's house where women found refuge. It ended in every life that was touched and transformed by her courage. Marina was not just a survivor. She was a victor. Not because she had destroyed her enemies, but because she had refused to be destroyed. And as the sun set over Rosewood, painting the sky orange and pink, Marina held her daughter in her arms and whispered softly, "We made it, my love. Both of us. Together." Sophia did not understand the meaning of the words, but one day she would. And when she understood, she would know that she was born not of a tragedy, but of a miracle. Of the miracle of human resilience, of the miracle of maternal love that overcomes everything, of the miracle of a woman who chose to live, even when everything conspired for her to die. And this story, the story of Marina Santos, teacher, mother, survivor, would become eternal, not for the horrors she faced, but for the light she carried even in the deepest darkness. Dear listeners, we hope Marina and Sophia's story has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of pain, resistance, and victory, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what stood out most to you in this story. Every day we bring intense narratives like this, which reveal the deepest and most resilient side of the human. So, stories that remind us of the strength that exists within each of us, even in the most difficult moments. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on life. Until then, and remember, never lose hope. Light always conquers darkness.